Charged with taking kickbacks related to the building and operation of a juvenile detention center in Luzerne County.
Every single day I wake up having to fight to live when I really don't want to.
You can expect that I will impose the maximum sentence allowed by law.
The rules don't matter. They don't apply. These people can do whatever they want.
Because I didn't understand how I could be guilty of a kickback.
This is a sad event when individuals who took an oath violate that oath and violate the law.
I loved helping those kids. I would never do anything to hurt a child.
No, you know what he told everybody in court? They need to be held accountable for their actions. You need to be. You remember me?
There's a lot of good people who sit on the Luzerne County Court of Common Pleas who don't deserve to be tarnished by what I did.
100% the trickle-down effect of that changed where we are today.
There are 0 beds, detention beds in our region. There's none in Luzerne County.
Oh my
face. I didn't do nothing.
Now it's to the point where there are no consequences for actions, and that's a problem.
It's beyond a crisis now. Really it is. But we're really on the verge of catastrophe.
Hi, Newswatch 16. I'll be home soon.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Melissa Steininger coming to you from the Newswatch 16 digital studio. This is Action 16 Kids for Cash, the New Crisis live Q&A session. We thought this would be a good way to kind of wrap up this series that we've been bringing to you throughout the week. We've been uncovering the crisis that's unfolding in Luzerne County, the lack of detention beds causing some major issues for the juvenile law system, the courts, law enforcement, and of course, our schools. We've taken a deep dive into this issue, spending more than 10 minutes of our nightly newscast every night discussing the impacts this crisis is having and what exactly led us here. So thank you all for joining us. Of course, if anyone has any questions on these pieces or any questions for our experts, please submit them throughout the live session. And of course, this lack of detention bed issues is still very much ongoing, even as these stories are wrapping up. We've been working to uncover this issue for several months now. None of it would be possible without the guests that I'm joining here tonight. They've trusted us to share this story, share this issue, bring it to our community in hopes of creating a change. So with that, I would like to introduce our panel here tonight that will be responding to some of those questions. We have from Luzerne County Probation Director, we have Kevin Perluke. We have the Juvenile Probation Director, Chris Parker. We also have Kingston Police Chief Richard Kochik, Juvenile Detective Steve Gibson, and the First Assistant District Attorney of Luzerne County, Tony Ross. Thank you all for being here tonight. I really do appreciate it. All right.
Thank you.
So I want to start with you guys kind of at the helm of all of this is that lack of detention beds with all of these issues that we're seeing. So with that, I mean, that's hard for people to fathom that there is not a single bed in Luzerne County or in the entire Northeast region to be able to place these kids. So Kevin, I kind of want to start with you as this kind of led our discussion in the beginning stages of this story. It's causing a lot of problems for your office and for the county as a whole. Can you kind of speak to the issues that you've been seeing with this?
Sure, absolutely, Melissa. It is difficult. First of all, our nearest detention center can be anywhere between an hour and a half to 2 hours away. So there's a transportation issue there and a lack of detention beds on top of it. And then I'll add a third layer of the detention center is not always accepting our youth if they're more troubled. So, or have some violent outbursts and stuff like that. So this causes a big trickle down effect why we're seeing these kids that are committing crimes in our area and they're still back on the streets because we don't have anywhere to place them. One good thing we are doing is we're trying to beef up our community-based programming as the best that we can. And some kids are being seen daily as well by these agencies, and on top of that, by the probation department. So that's the way we're trying to combat it, but it is not easy.
That aspect of rehabilitation, obviously so important. I want to touch on that in just a bit, but also, I mean, those daily check-ins, that's causing more strain, more stress on your department as well, I'm sure.
Absolutely, it is. And our probation officers are doing a terrific job here. They're trained to do the job, and they all are doing it very well. But it is a little bit of frustration in their eyes because these kids that they are, supervising have some serious charges. They're a disruption in the community, and they have to be held accountable. And then when they're not being held accountable and they're still, in our communities, it is a big frustration, not even for probation, for everyone from police all the way down to school officials. So it is something where it is a major issue, and it continues to be.
I want to bring in the director of juvenile probation as well, Chris Parker. Chris, I mean, we're not talking jailing every kid here. We're not talking about every kid that comes into probation. This is just a small amount of kids, those worst offenders that we're talking about when we're talking about detaining and detention beds.
Yes, Melissa, that's correct. It's a very small amount of kids, of juveniles, that need to be placed, which is a good thing. Our jobs in juvenile probation here is we want to maintain kids in the community. We do not want to, have to remove kids from their homes, their schools, their normal settings, as much as possible. However, there are kids that do need to be removed from their homes, and they do need to be placed. They need a higher level of care. They're struggling in our community-based programs that, some kids, they're just not effective. And some of that is just simply buy-in from the kids and wanting to do what they're being asked to do. But obviously our goal, Melissa, is to keep kids in the home as much as possible. However, the truth of the matter is there just are some kids that need to be placed. And, for those kids that right now we're not placing, that should be placed, unfortunately, we're doing a disservice to those kids as well. The bottom line here is we're talking about children. And, I've joined this profession for a reason, and I believe is, all kids have an opportunity to change. But sometimes some of the things that are going on in the community when, the things that we're offering in the community aren't effective. And all of the professionals that are working with these juveniles realize that these young men and young ladies need a higher level of care. By the system not being able to provide that to these juveniles, again, I feel we're doing a disservice to them because, again, they are in need of supervision and treatment. And sometimes that supervision and treatment needs to happen on an inpatient basis as opposed to being in the community.
Definitely. That's a great perspective there. With that, no detention beds. A lot of times these kids are getting sent back home into the communities. With that, I want to bring in Kingston Police Chief Richard Kochik. We see this violence kind of play out on the street. Can you just talk to me about what we're witnessing as far as the violence that has trickled into the community due to these issues?
Well, what we're seeing now is the fights inside the schools. I believe, in my opinion, it's unprecedented what we're seeing. The amount of fights, the amount of violence, and it's disrupting the whole school. And then once they get out of school, it's also continuing out into the streets. I put cruisers down by our middle school on a regular basis to monitor the people going home because of how many fight calls that we have. I believe that, and going back to juvenile probation and some of the things that they just discussed, a lot of these kids, they're repeat offenders. And the more that they know that there's no consequences and they're not going to get in trouble for what they're doing, it's escalating and it's continuing. And it's a lot of it. We do have a lot of the same kids that are committing a lot of these acts of violence.
How about for you, Detective Gibson? You work directly with the juvenile crimes. What are you seeing as far as, the daily change in what you do?
Well, I would say definitely Chris hit the nail right on the head. With, it's a low amount of kids and very specific ones. But I could say that there's programs out there that have worked that, like the Youth Aid Panel, they have worked for some of the kids. But like Chief Kochik had said, the ones that we see over and over and over again, we're doing a disservice. We're slapping them on the wrist and we're sending them back out there on the street. And when that happens, eventually they commit crimes that they've gone too far. And I've had them in the station before and they're like, call my mom. And I'm like, well, I'm calling your mom, but you're not going home. Like you're being charged as an adult today. And we definitely did a disservice by not doing something before we hit that level.
Yeah. Chief Kochik, these are the schools that you grew up in that you're now serving. Have you seen a change since you went to school? I mean, I went to school in Luzerne County as well. And do they look different nowadays?
Well, I'm going to tell you a funny story. So when I was in school, if you got yourself into an altercation or you got yourself into a jam by doing something, you had an option. You'd go down to the principal's office, and number one, you were scared of your parents. You were scared of the discipline of what was going to happen when you got home, and what was going to happen once they found out about it. So a lot of the times, I mean, you had an option, and you're going to laugh, but the option was the paddle. And we all took the paddle because we did not want our parents, because of what was going to happen when we got home. What am I seeing in the schools? I have never seen anything like what I see today. And I can't believe that I'm seeing it. They don't care. A lot of these kids don't care. They will tell you, as law enforcement in uniform, pretty much where to go. They say and do pretty much whatever they want. And once again, it's not all, it's your small amount of kids that are having the major behavioral problems. But that affects everybody. That affects the whole dynamics of how that school is being run is what I'm seeing. And you're coming from the middle school where it's starting, and now you're going up to the high school, and it's getting worse. It's getting worse for the high school in Plymouth, for this district. We have fights all the time. Still, they've dropped a little bit, but we still have the problems that, our numbers, our arrests, since we put the police officer in the school, it's definitely dropped, but we still have the problems on a regular basis.
Yeah, so our second piece in this series focused on the schools specifically. A lot of that footage coming from the hallways of the schools. Would you say that that is an accurate depiction of what is happening within the walls of these buildings?
Oh, yes, 100%.
And Melissa, what we're seeing is we're living in a post-COVID world. So once the world opened back up again, we're seeing such a rise in violence and violent crimes among juveniles that it's alarming. And the lack of detention beds frustrates the process. And our number one goal is to keep the community safe, as well as our schools. We certainly want kids to feel safe in school and not to be afraid to walk the halls or go to the bathroom. So this small percentage that everyone has talked about that need to be detained can't be. And it just frustrates the entire system. And, we can put some of them on ankle bracelets, not all, but it becomes a big challenge on behalf of prosecutors and law enforcement and juvenile probation.
Melissa, I had a conversation. I had a phone call this morning from Senator Lisa Baker, and every once in a while we do talk about the issues. And we talked this morning, and her first question as we were talking was, hey, whatever happened with that incident? And this was going back to one of the incidents at a football game where our guys were patrolling the area because of high volumes of problems, and a kid, was he 13, Steve? Yeah. 13-year-old came up behind me and sucker punched me in the back of the head and took off running. And we chased him down, and he got arrested. And, she said, what was whatever happened there? And I said, well, there was no beds. We were charging him with aggravated assault, which is a felony. We were fully uniformed. I said there was no beds. We ended up calling his parents. He went home, and the end result was you're on probation. And, well, that was like a 6-month thing. And he was back doing his things, and we probably dealt with him again.
And all those other kids there saw that.
They all saw it. They all saw what happened. They saw him go home. And that's a kid. And I think juvenile probation, I think everybody will agree, you're assaulting a police officer. Something should have been done. I think everybody will agree that is the examples of the problems of not having a detention bed anywhere.
Yeah, we talk about that trickle-down effect as well. Something we've also been talking about when we talk about those lack of detention beds, there was originally a facility built in Pittston Township, near Pittston Township. That facility no longer available to your use. Kevin or Chris, I'm not sure if you could speak to, why is that facility no longer available to your youth to help combat this problem?
Yeah, Melissa and Chris, you could chime in. It's state run now. It is a secure treatment, residential placement now for our youth. So it's a 48 bed facility for that. So that's that long term, high risk level youth that's placed there. Now that's for everyone throughout the state of Pennsylvania. So there's no detention center, but yet it's now converted into a state-run secure residential facility. And Chris, if you want to chime in, go ahead.
Yeah, and Melissa, the issue with that is what's disturbing to myself is that the state has taken over this building. It used to be what we call youth forestry camp, and it used to be located up in Whitehaven, and it was a program that we had a lot of success with placing our youth in the past when they needed to be taken out of the community. Again, like I said, we've seen a lot of success with kids that have graduated from that program. Unfortunately, they closed, and the state bought the building out and created YFC as a state program. The disheartening thing is that, as Kevin said, there's 48 beds. All of the beds are filled with Philadelphia juveniles. They have inundated a lot of the beds that are available with juveniles that need to be placed, and it's unfortunate that we have a place right here in our own backyard that we don't have access to, obviously based to a lot of the things that have happened in the past. However, there is a facility right here that you would think we would be able to utilize, and there's a lot of rooms still in that facility that could be used for detention space that might be able to help this matter. However, we just don't have access to that.
And Chris, I think, Melissa, another thing, and I think Chief Kochik here does too, is we're looking to place kids as well, and then we're told there could be a 6-month wait for these youth to get into these facilities. So you can't keep a youth in detention for 6 months to 9 months, getting zero services to help rehabilitate them, and then wait for that bed to open up, hopefully in 9 months. So that's the other crisis. It's not just detention; it's also the placements, the lack of secure placements in the state, where we have that waiting period for, years ago, you'd go to detention, you get a placement, a kid would be able to go probably within 30 days. That's not happening right now, and that is causing the trickle-down effect as well as what we're seeing today.
Yeah, so I just want to reiterate. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. To piggyback what Kevin said, another issue with the placement facilities, not only the wait time in order to get a kid into a facility in order to help them, but it's also the questions that are asked in order to gain entry into a placement facility in regards to whether or not a kid is going to be accepted or not. Because so many, counties are looking to place some of their juveniles, the placement facilities have now had the ability to basically pick and choose what type of kid they want to accept versus what type of kid that they need to accept. And unfortunately, in the situation that we're in right now, because so many counties are looking for placement, is that it allows the placement facilities to, in some terms, cherry pick and decide, this kid is more violent than this kid, so we're going to take the less violent kid. However, we all know, as law enforcement, as administrators, the more violent kid is the kid that needs to be in detention, and it's the violent kid that's going home, and it's the kid who's not, who's at risk, but not at the level of the high risk kid that they're willing to accept. Some of those questions that were being asked by these facilities or placement facilities is the kid a fighter? Well, as Chief just stated, I don't know the exact percentage of allegations that come in for fighting, but I could tell you it's most of our allegations that come in is for kids that are fighting in the schools. So if one of the questions that these placement facilities or detention facilities are asking does this kid fight? And the answer is yes, then they're denying this kid access into their program. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about we're doing a disservice to these kids that need a higher level of care, that need treatment and supervision that they're not getting out in the community. But if placement facilities and detention facilities, aren't willing to take the kid who's a high-risk kid who, you know, might create a little bit of problems, and that's where they need to be, then we're defeating the purpose here.
Melissa, if I may, real quick, and with Chris and Kevin present for this, I think one of the other issues that we probably should touch on a little bit is the alternative learning centers. So we always had an option as years went on of the kids that were, I'm going after the ones that are constantly causing the problems in your school. We always had the alternative learning center that they would accept them, and that's where they would go for their schooling and rehabilitation. We don't have an alternative learning center anymore. So we have so these kids that are constantly violent and disruptive in the classroom and in the hallways, we have nowhere to put them now either. And I believe, and I'm pretty accurate on this, if you were to place your 20 most violent, aggressive individuals, children, into these alternative learning centers, you would eliminate a lot of problems. And I don't know of one down. There's not one in our area right now. So and they're gone.
We have another viewer question I also want to bring up too. Ruth asks, whatever happened to St. Michael's School for Boys? Why can't that be used for a detention center? There are numerous places that Luzerne County should be looking at. These kids shouldn't be getting a slap on the wrist and then put back into society to do it all over again. Is there anyone that might be able to speak to that a little bit?
I could speak to that. St. Michael's closed years ago. It was bought out by someone else, a private industry. Unfortunately, and it's a great question, by the way. Unfortunately, you would need someone to come in and if it's private or what, and take that over and convert it. And that's probably millions of dollars. So there's a big cost to convert something like that into a detention center. So I think that's why, that hasn't been taken back over as a detention. It was a placement years ago. I haven't been there in years.
EHAB services.
Yeah, it was EHAB services. And then after that, I'm not sure what it is now. And I just want to piggyback what Chief Kochik said, and Chris. The other issue is too, why the bed weight is they don't have the staff. Okay, the staff shortages in this field is at alarming rate right now, just like you pointed out with the teacher situation. So when you don't have staff to man all the beds that need to be manned, it becomes an issue. So that difficult kid who should be placed, they don't want the problem with, because they don't have the staff to take care of them, is then that difficult youth is in the community. So this is how it just spirals bigger and bigger. And I think these last 3 days showed the public how it is, and how it is an issue. And obviously I have kids that are in high school, and I want them to be in a safe place. I think everyone wants that. You send your kids to school every day and hope they have a great day and no issues. That's the ultimate goal there. We're not seeing that all the time. And our hope is, with this story, we could show that, something needs to be done quicker, sooner than later. And I do think, and I'm an advocate for a regional detention center in northeastern PA. I think it's needed. There's a daily need of 35 to 43 beds daily here. And I just think I would hope it could happen sooner than later, which would help the kids, help the community, keep the kids accountable, and put a little more at ease and help these youth that are troubled, to get them the help that they need. We're not trying to punish them. We're trying to help them to be productive members of society.
On top of that, I'm sure without that rehabilitation services, as Detective Gibson has brought up, they're arresting sometimes the same kids 2, 3, 4 times. ADA Ross, could you just kind of speak, what does that look like as far as prosecution on your end of it? Does it make it more difficult for the DA's office to be able to prosecute these crimes against these children?
Well, to answer that question and to also comment on that last viewer's question, it underscores exactly what we're talking about, where you have these repeat offenders, violent offenders that need to be detained, that need services. And when you don't have the facilities and you just let them back into the community and back into the schools, it's sending a message of there is no accountability. There are no repercussions for these violent crimes that are being committed. So as prosecutors, I mean, I agree with the viewer. It sends a message that it's a slap on the wrist, and that has the ripple effect of sending a message to not only that offender, but to all the kids that individual may go to school with, and whoever that individual may be, friends with on social media and beyond, that there is no accountability. So it frustrates our efforts not having the facilities to hold these more violent offenders accountable and to place them and to get them the services they need.
Ruth has a follow-up question as well to what you guys were just commenting on. With the lack of beds, have you asked any officials why they can't use Retreat State Prisons or the Whitehaven Center for Detention Center? Those two places are sitting empty. There are some efforts. I mean, we are trying to work. I think the counties, because this isn't just a Luzerne County issue, correct? It's across 13 different counties.
Statewide.
Yes, and at a crisis level, as we talked about, at 13 different counties. I'm sure everyone is kind of trying to do what they can at this point to look at those, different facilities or different options available to them. Kevin, did you know anything about the Whitehaven facilities, or is it just
Whitehaven? I haven't. Retreat, I'm not sure. I think it all comes down to cost, and how much needs to be put in these facilities and to convert. I mean, obviously the Retreat is already set up, but like the Whitehaven, to come in, set it up as a detention center, that cost is probably through the roof. I'm sure it's something that anyone can entertain, but I don't know how much that would cost to do that. I'm thinking anywhere from our county, even if it was a 24-bed facility, it's still going to be a lot of money to do that and convert that.
We have seen in the third part of the story as well, $172 million was saved since the change of those, reductions in incarcerations and in detention. Is that something you guys have been speaking with? I know, Chief Kochik, you said that you talked to Senator Lisa Baker. Is that all is there efforts to try to reallocate that money at that state level? Is that something you guys want to see as well?
I think Lisa Baker is definitely for that and looking to do that also. I did ask her about Retreat today. Yeah, it's empty. I mean, it's already set up, but what has to be done inside of it. But then again, so all the money that's been saved over these years of not sending anybody to detention centers. So is that money sitting in a pot somewhere that we could utilize to get these facilities up and running? Because I believe the number that you had was somewhere around 170 million or whatever that should have been spent on juvenile services. So is that money somewhere where it can be utilized? Kevin, I mean, that would be a huge to have that kind of money somewhere to utilize for a center or a facility.
Absolutely.
Would you guys like to see some of that money allocated to some of these programs and services for rehabilitation as well? I mean, we're talking about these detention beds, but the rehabilitation aspect, I'm sure, is so important to both of you as well. Chris, did you want to speak on that at all?
Sure. It's very important to put money back into our community-based programs. In order to be effective, we need to have very strong community-based programs, especially with the state moving towards the move of, not wanting to, place kids, feeling that all kids can be maintained in the community, even though we all know that, that's not necessarily the case. But obviously those monies that are collected absolutely should be put back into the juvenile system in regards to whether it was, looking into building a new facility or assisting, in the cost of the facility, or simply, like you previously just stated, making our community-based programs as strong as possible. And it's important for our community-based programs to be strong. But it's also important for these young violent offenders to buy in to these community-based programs. That's a big part of the problem, is that they're not buying into the community-based programs. And if the community-based programs aren't effective and there's a higher level of care that is needed, that's where the issue comes in. We don't have the availability of that higher care. It's a struggle. Melissa, just to reiterate something that was said earlier that, really frustrates me. I've been here 25 years as a probation officer and now chief of the department, is the ripple effect from this entire situation has affected everyone in every which way, fashion, and form. You know, taking kids out of homes is not something we want to do. However, we also know school should be safe. School should be fun. Kids should be able to go to school and enjoy themselves and learn without having to worry about being assaulted. And teachers should be able to show up to school and teach kids without having to worry about being assaulted. But you know, it's a struggle for me, and what I've watched over the years and what has happened. The system is now converted to, you know, obviously we know that we have to get these violent kids out of our schools. However, the system is reverted to, when we put kids out of schools, we're putting all these kids into cyber schools because obviously, you know, we're mandated to educate these kids. The problem with that, and what I mean by ripple effect, is when these kids are put out of schools, whether they're expelled or they're suspended or what have you, or they're sent home on a 45-day process where they're not able to go back into school, they have to do cyber school for 45 or 90 days. The problem with that is a lot of these kids come from dysfunctional homes, and a lot of these kids' parents have to work. So, you know, you get a kid who really is not interested in his education, who is now sent home on cyber school, and you don't have a parent at home. That kid's not logging on to do his academics or to do what he needs to do to meet the criteria of, you know, what the school is asking for. So that's what I mean by the whole ripple effect. It's kind of like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. Obviously, we need to keep our schools safe. But again, you know, every kid just going home on cyber school, in most cases, that's what these kids want. They want to go home. They don't want to be in school, you know. But it's a shame with what's going on. Like I said, I don't know what the right answer is, but, you know, it's not fair to our kids who are in the schools, who are there trying to learn. And, you know, I remember a personal experience of my child. She was in a public school. She's now in college. But I remember when she was in high school and she was in a public school and she was being bullied a little bit. And, you know, I was told, well, you know, you got to understand your daughter's pretty, she's athletic, and she's smart. And I said, well, does that equal being bullied? And, you know, what a lot of people are doing is they're taking their kids out of the public schools and they're putting them into private schools. Unfortunately, in our area that we live in, which is a poverty-stricken area in a lot of our local areas, you know, Wilkes-Barre, the Valley West area, a lot of those kids come from low-income families. Their parents don't have the money to send them to private schools. So those kids that are trying to learn in schools are just stuck. And it's a shame that when I hear they're afraid to go to the bathroom because they're afraid of being assaulted. You know, that's how bad this crisis has come. And it's very disturbing that as professionals, as educators, as law enforcement, police officers, probation officers, and what have you, we're the adults in this matter. The bottom line is something has to change and something has to give. And we can't be worried about what happened 15 years ago. You know, that's done and over. We got to move on to what's going on and what's happening today. And right now, we all have to do a better job of serving the youth and the families that we serve.
Melissa, real quick,
yeah.
Well, I got to touch on what Chris just said.
Sure.
Like that whole thing with these children afraid to go to the bathroom and afraid to walk the halls, that hit me hard. Going back about 2 years ago, it really did. I had kids, and I started spending a lot of time there at that point. We didn't have a police officer in the school. We were working on it. But that hit me hard when some of these kids told me that they won't go to the bathroom because they're afraid. That's why this became a mission of mine, to try to straighten this out and try to fix this problem. Seeing kids being afraid to be there, obviously have no other choice, but they have to go to this school, bothered me so much. And, you know, I look at the teachers and how they feel. No one should be subjected to this. Nobody. No kid, no teacher. They should not be subjected to the amount of violence and what they're experiencing every day in these schools. And I know it's not just Wyoming Valley West. I know it's all over the place. They should not be subjected to this. It's sad.
Definitely. We are talking so much about that culture of violence. We have a viewer question right now. Is there a culture of violence among today's youth? And if so, what aspects in society are driving it? Detective Gibson, Chief Kochik, I'm not sure if you guys want to touch on that just because you guys are the boots on the ground currently. But if there's anything that anyone wants to chime in at this point.
I mean, I guess it definitely starts at home. We're talking during this now that we're talking about the kids at the top that need to be placed all the time. But I mean, it's kind of through the whole level. So we're citing kids for minor infractions, disorderly conduct, harassment, things like that. And I don't think that anything's happened with that either. I think that that's just kind of pushed off to the side. I don't know of anywhere that's taking these kids and giving them like community service or something. There's none of that. I mean, the programs that Chris is talking about, I think that would be huge. I think that the officer in the school at this point for us, we built a good bridge there.
Good relationship.
It was very difficult prior to having an officer in the school. The kids have a lot more trust in our department now, with both of the officers that are in our two schools that we have, one at the high school level and one at the middle school level. So that's a big thing. I've seen them walk in Officer Sauce at the middle school. That I would walk past his office there, and he'll have a kid just sit in that chair there, just cooling off, hanging out in his office, and that was huge to see that they have trust in him.
He built many relationships, and I'm very proud of him for that. They all know him. He says he goes to the grocery store. He goes, Officer Sauce, Officer Sauce. A lot of kids have attached to him, and that was the main goal of this. Besides trying to stop the problems, they've attached to him, and he's gained a lot of relationships at the school.
And when we talk about families, well, maybe they don't have that structure at home, and when they come to school, they love it. They love the structure. They love that they have structure there with him, and they have somebody there that might be able to help them out more. And really, I think that was huge for us.
Melissa, if I can too, I also think we're seeing a higher rate of mental health issues in youth, as well as drug and alcohol. So I think that adds to everything too. So making sure that we have the youth is in the right services and they're getting the right treatment to help with the issues at school. They may be acting out at school because there's a major issue at home. You know what I mean? And that's their place they're acting out on, because they're not able to do that at home. So we are seeing, a lot of diagnoses in kids with the mental health and the drug and alcohol, on top of everything else with the violence and everything like that. So again, it's a really, really, really like an onion. You keep peeling off, and there's more and more of what we're dealing with here. So, but that's another thing. It's great to hear Officer Cisnowski. I used to go over to Valley West Middle School. I see him in action. Chris Parker and myself used to love going to the local schools and seeing, and interacting with the school resource officers, because they do a tremendous job. I mean, we're very thankful that we have them in our school districts, because they're like unsung heroes. They just do a terrific job.
No question.
And to answer that question, Melissa, there is a lot of dysfunctional families. There's only a mom or a dad, or there's not. So that causes a lot of issues with a lot of these kids also, and that is definitely plays a role in that question that individual had asked.
Yeah, we don't know what these kids are going through when they're home. Did they eat before they came to school? Who's at home? Is anybody even watching them? Did they watch their own siblings at home overnight? We don't know what they're coming into, but I can tell you that having that officer in that school was huge for us. It really was.
And Melissa, I could tell you, as Officer Gibson had stated, in my professional opinion, the bottom line is that the problems, it starts at home. Parenting has changed. It's changed from when I was a kid. These kids nowadays, they have absolutely no fear of their parents whatsoever. And a part of the problem is parents making excuses for their kids. Parents nowadays, a lot of these parents with these troubled youth are not holding their kids accountable at all. There's no consequences at home. And when there's no consequences at home and a kid has nothing to be afraid of in regards to, the actions or whatever it is that they've committed. I always say to people and tell kids this: if they're willing to disrespect their mom, then they're willing to disrespect anybody. And we see that on a consistent basis. The lack of respect from these kids in our schools with police officers and teachers it's unbelievable. The verbiage and the language that these kids choose to use. My days growing up, it just, it took a community to raise a child. Nowadays, a kid gets in trouble in school, the parent comes in school, and the police officer is trying to explain to the parent, what their child has done. And the first thing the parent does is starts cursing out the police officer in front of their child.
Happens all the time.
Not setting a positive and a good example, but cursing out the police officer in front of their child and making excuses for their child as opposed to holding their child accountable. So, when children have the ability to see their own parents, even though they know they've done wrong, come into the school and curse out authoritative figures, that has kind of put the kid on a pedestal of, they kind of feel that their parent has their back and now they can say and do whatever they want to do. And again, that's been a big part of the problem. And parents, to answer the viewer's question, parents are not being held accountable at all for their actions of their children.
Yeah.
And Melissa, couldn't agree with Chris more. And it kind of goes back to what Chris was saying earlier, which he's exactly correct. If you take a child out of school then and place the child in cyber school and they come right back into the school almost emboldened because of whatever may be happening at home. And again, if you look at this post-COVID world that we're living in, we're coming out of months and months and months of being shut down. And now we're back in the school, and now, we're trying to implement structure and discipline. And, in some of these situations, you have these violent outbursts.
I'm looking at the question of scared straight. How are you going to scare them straight when there's really no punishment for them? There really isn't. They're committing crimes, and there's nowhere to put them. There's really no punishment for them. Scaring them, the scared straight. I don't know how it works if you don't have anywhere to anything to scare them with.
Right.
They said they said they got rid of the scared straight programs that used to be on TV, and when they used to take kids to the jails. And we used to do that. We used to take our juveniles up to the Dallas prison and over to the Luzerne County Correctional Facility and take them on a tour where they would have an opportunity to speak to the inmates. And some of it was extremely scary. However, they shut that down because parents felt that was creating more harm than help to their kids, and it was very detrimental to kids as they continue to grow as young men or young ladies. So the system tells us that scared straight doesn't work. Boot camps don't work. It's odd because I'm an old school guy, and back in my day, I've seen boot camps and scared straight, and I've seen it help a lot of kids. And change a lot.
We're all in the same boat with you.
Yeah, and unfortunately, growing up as an old school guy, and a lot of the things that I know have worked for all of us as transitioning from young people into professional, successful adults, is not currently happening with our youth in today's age.
We have another one coming in. Teachers can't discipline kids anymore, so the kids tell them off and they do whatever they want. Bring back standing in the corner and paddle. Something I think that you also spoke to earlier as well, Chief Kochik.
Yes, and let me tell you, it hurt. I'm not gonna lie, there was holes in that thing, and but I'll tell you, it definitely changed. It changed the way you thought about doing something when you were in school. I know it changed, my outlook. It hurt. And yes, I think the time it happened to me, they didn't call my parents, thank God, at that point in time. I would tell you this right now, even if it was to happen today, David, they'd say, call my parents. It wouldn't work. And society has changed that level of discipline. Did I like that? Do I like that level of discipline? I'll tell you what, it gets your point across, but society has changed the way, that goes. And that's why it'll never get brought back.
Some of the teachers we even spoke with for this series even said that they're not allowed to touch students in any capacity, even breaking up fights, things like that they could get put on leave. So their hands are tied when you see these kids fighting in the hallways. They can't even break that up.
Which is absolutely, I can't even believe that they can.
They're afraid of getting hurt too. I mean, they went to school to teach, not to break up fights all day either. You know what I mean?
And when I actually do the seminars with the kids, I do one at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade every year at the beginning of the year, and I tell them, believe me, it's already instilled in their head, nobody can touch me. Well, they're wrong, and I tell them that they're wrong. We, as the police, will use whatever means necessary to make an arrest, and I make that very clear to all of them. Because their parent, most of them will tell you, oh, you can't touch me. Well, that's not true. If you are violent and you're causing a problem, we will use whatever means necessary to arrest you. And that's the law.
Well, Melissa, the issue in the schools with the teachers, and I don't blame them in not wanting to get involved. Number one, not only the risk of them being assaulted, and several teachers over the past few years have been assaulted, have had to been transported to the hospital by ambulance from breaking up fights in schools. But the other issue you have is as professionals, if a kid makes an allegation that they were touched, in our world, you're guilty until you're proven innocent. You're not innocent until proven guilty. And that's a touchy situation as well, because as professionals, no teacher wants to go through the issue of having to clear their name because a kid made a false accusation that they've been touched. That's a tough situation as well. And the word is out, and with our Luzerne County kids, they know. They talk about it, they laugh about it. The young man in the segment with the officer from Scranton, you heard him clearly say, hey, Newswatch 16, I'll be home soon. That's the mentality of these kids. They think that they can do whatever they want. They can act however they want. They can victimize people, and they're going home because they know that we have nowhere to put them.
You are correct.
How about as far as some of these anti-bullying programs was brought up in this most recent question? After all the school shootings in the 1990s, there was a big push for anti-bullying programs. What happened? Why did these programs fail? I also would love to bring up the topic of the cell phones in schools as well, and how social media might have changed that landscapes. Is there anyone that really wants to speak to that as well?
I'll touch on the cell phones. I saw in your story that, and I think Attorney Ross will probably end up touching on this also, and Detective Gibson. Everyone can. The cell phones is a huge, huge problem. Whatever school banned them, kudos to them. Kudos to them, because I'll tell you what, a lot of the problems resolve around all these apps. They're texting each other from classroom to classroom about fights and about this, and then they're videoing it and they're posting it online.
Melissa, that's where the bullying is.
Yes.
That's where we're seeing the bullying through social media.
If they were to do what that school did, Hanover, if they were to do, if the schools were to do what that school district did, I'm telling you, we would have a major decline in some of these problems.
Is that really the driving force at this point that you're seeing?
I'm not going to say it's the drive. It's definitely, it plays a major role. We're still going to have the problems, but there's a lot of attention here. There's a lot of attention seeking that's going on here also. And they know that their friends are going to repost and post and repost all these fights and, popularity, what have you. But these cell phones are a big problem in these schools.
It's a good start. Eliminating that would be a good start.
Well, just in the story itself, how many of those were cell phone videos that we saw with the fights in your story?
All of them.
You know what I mean? We're taken, and I'm sure everyone in Luzerne County probably saw it, the day it was taken, right? Because of social media. So that is a big contributor. I have to agree with Chief Kochik there, because, when I was in high school, we didn't have cell phones. So if you're going to fight, it was kind of like after school at 3:30 and stuff like. Now they're going in between classes. What did you say about me? Well, so-and-so texted me, you said this. Yep. And here we go. And then, it's on Snapchat or wherever they're at. And it's a big deal. And then they want to post everything. Look what's going on here. Look at this fight. And then it's just a big contributing factor. I agree. I think if you could limit the accessibility of cell phones in the school setting, I think we would see a little bit of a change. I really would.
And Melissa, I agree with that 100%. I think that would decrease the violence in our schools big time without the social media. However, there's always two sides of the spectrum. And a part of the issue with that is you'll have a lot of parents complaining about their kids have rights. And you have a lot of parents that are concerned about their kids that are good kids that aren't getting in trouble, so that when these things are occurring in school, or if there's problems, parents are telling their kids, hey, call me, even though the kids have the availability to go to the law enforcement officers in the school or school administrators, the parents want calls. And, when we've talked about, two parents, when they know that their kid has an issue with the cell phone, hey, take the phone off of them. The first thing the parent says is, well, if there's an issue in the school, Johnny needs to call me. They need to have access to this phone. I disagree with that, because again, we all grew up without phones and we were fine. I think that would decrease the level of violence in our schools significantly, because again, that's the reward for the kids. that they get to say, you know, that they sent this and this was posted. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is the kid who got beat on, who's the victim, who's now posted all over social media. I can only imagine that as a parent, how you feel when everyone on social media is just seeing your son, you know, get jumped by a bunch of kids. And not only to see it and witness it, but then to know that nothing has happened and basically, you know, there was no consequences for the kid, and the kid is right back home. So it's a very frustrating matter.
Definitely. One more question here we have. There's so many crimes that happen with teenagers in Lackawanna and Luzerne County. Can't they combine one together? I'm assuming they're talking about those regional facilities.
Like a detention center? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Again, I think, that would be fantastic. You know, I just think the powers that be would have to make that happen. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we do have facilities around. We touched on it earlier. It just be coming together and trying to come up with a solution. Majority of these detention centers are actually in the southeastern part of our state, in that Philadelphia region. So again, we're traveling. I'd rather travel 20 minutes instead of 2 hours, right? So that would be probably the best case scenario, to have that regional one, that Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Poconos region, and have accessibility there. So that would be great. It's just, it comes down to dollars and cents. It does.
Yeah. And I'm sure it must be difficult to take kids out of these homes to begin with, but then to send them, you know, hours or sometimes states away, that has to be even more difficult to say, hey, your family might not have access to even see you or have any contact with you as well.
Well, the good thing about that, we never want to send anyone away far, but with the good thing about social media now is we have the Zoom capabilities, right? So if someone is, you know, 2 hours away, a lot of the facilities now are capable of having those Zoom meetings, so a parent could see their child and still be engaged, and they still have parent, you know, weekends where the parents could come see the youth. And sometimes some facilities do allow, like, they'll give bus, if transportation is an issue, they might pay for an Uber, they may pay a bus ticket or something like that. So that's one good thing about the social media and the everything on a computer now, because it has helped that. But again, we want to keep kids, if we do send them away, close as home as possible, because the parents still need to be involved, because we have to have that plan of when they come home. The parents got to be on board the same way as the kid is, you know, when they come home, and have that happen. So that is a good question, though. Again, you know, this is why we're talking. We don't have a detention center in our region, and there needs to be one. There's no doubt about it.
Is that the main fix that you guys would see here, is seeing that regional detention facility? Is that kind of top priority for all of you right now?
I would say yes on our end. Chris, would you agree? I mean,
yes.
Yeah. I know Chief Kochik, that would, you know, if you have a juvenile that you are arresting and needs to be detained, I think you going 20 minutes to take that youth there instead of 2 hours, that limits the amount, the manpower that could be back in the community for a 20-minute ride instead of a 2-hour ride. You're taking 2 officers off the street then, instead of, you know, something that could happen and be back within an hour.
Yeah, you're putting 2 officers out for 4 hours, 2 hours up, 2 hours back, and then you need the 2 officers to replace them. So you have 4 officers on overtime immediately.
And it's not just that, but he's correct. You're not sending without 2 officers. That's just the way it is. That's the way we operate. But you're also looking at, you know, times have changed. We're busy. Kingston, we're busy. And, you know, our officers are usually constantly running calls to calls. I'm pulling guys off the road, and now now other places in the area are unsafe. 20 minutes would be fantastic.
Wonderful. One more question here. Why aren't violent juveniles who commit these violent acts in schools being expelled from schools like it was done in the old days? Instead, the violent juveniles are being kept in school and pose that continuing threats. So I guess that big question is, you know, why isn't expulsion an option anymore?
And I can answer that, Melissa. Expulsion is an option, and the schools do utilize expulsions. Again, most kids are suspended. You know, and again, sometimes we got to get the kids out of school based upon what it is that they've done. The problem with that, again, is you're sending these kids home where there's no structure, no supervision, or you have parents are at work or parents that simply just don't care. And what that allows the juvenile to do is wander the streets all day, when in reality they should be in school, but we know they can't. So now they're in the community when they should be in school, and they're victimizing people in the community. So, again, to answer that question again, kids have been expelled. They are expelled based upon certain crimes that they commit. They are afforded an opportunity to, be reintegrated back into the schools if they prove themselves. Unfortunately, these kids struggle to do that. A lot of them never end up getting back into school. They continue to struggle with failing cyber school, and they continue to run the streets in the community and victimize people. And until we have somewhere to put them and get them off the streets to give them the higher level of care that they need in order to rehabilitate them, we're going to continue to see these struggles.
Also on that topic, we work very well with Wyoming Valley West school administration, from the superintendent down to the principals. We work very well with them. Their hands are tied on a lot of these expulsions. They're not allowed to do a lot of them. There has to be certain criteria met, and they'll tell me straight out, like, their hands are definitely tied. And the other thing is where are you putting them? The alternative learning centers that were here yesterday are no longer here to put the kids like this. So once again, as was just said, you're going to cyber, and what are they doing? They're roaming the streets. The administrators that we've been dealing with, they're all on board with the problem and trying to solve that problem. But their hands are tied, and I know they are because I've had this discussion several times on what they can and cannot do with these kids. That's why a lot of them are back in these schools.
And not only that, Melissa, but you have a lot of kids that have IEPs, an individual educational plan. And based upon these kids having these IEPs, the school districts are only permitted to suspend these kids for what I believe is 10 days in a school year. So the school districts have to be.
That was the rules I was talking about.
Okay. Yeah. So the school districts have to be very careful and be very selective in when they choose to suspend these kids. So sometimes when a suspension is warranted, the school is forced to keep the kid in school because they only have a certain amount of days because the kid has an IEP or is a full-time emotional learning support student. And, those kids, actually the full-time kids with the IEPs that are full-time learning emotional support students, they really need to be in school because those kids need the services of TSS workers, behavioral case management workers, CNY therapists, whatever it may be, in order to give them the services that they need. Once they're kicked out of school and they're home, they're pretty much on their own. So that's what I meant when I said earlier, even though these kids are committing crimes and obviously we got to hold them accountable, it's important that we service and help treat these kids and get them the help that they need.
This comes back to what I was talking about, the high level of mental health, drug and alcohol. This mental health is where those IEPs come in, right? So we have to make sure, even when we send a youth somewhere, we have to make sure that they're certified for a youth that maybe has an individual education plan. Yeah, so they're serviced in the right way, right? So we want to afford them the best education possible. So again, there's so many layers to this, right? And I think your story had put a light on a lot of this, and in the root of a lot of the problems that we're having.
It's funny because, a 3-part series, I feel like still only touched the surface of so much of these issues when you're discussing, especially the rehabilitation aspect of it as well. Those kids not getting access to the services that they needed is something that we wanted to try to make sure wasn't getting lost in all of this. So I'm glad that we have been able to touch on that as well tonight. We have another viewer question. So what happens to the juveniles that commit these crimes? I know it's kind of an open-ended, broad question, but is there anyone that could kind of speak to, what are we doing? I know a lot of times these kids go back into the classrooms, into the communities, but are they facing any repercussions at any point?
I'll tell you how I'll go on how it starts. I'll let Kevin or Chris tell you how it ends. Yep. So we're in this. We'll go to a school scenario with violence, whether it be assaults or what have you. So we currently have a zero tolerance, and we came out with this. I came out with this for the guys, 3 years ago. And with the work at the DA's office, we came up with a game plan, and this was our game plan, zero tolerance. So yes, we are arresting them.
and we are arresting them under a section, simple assault. Whether it's a mutual fight or if it's an actual assault, we're arresting them for either a misdemeanor 3 or a misdemeanor 2, along with your disorderly conducts and what have you. We are completely separate from the school, so the school will give them their 3-day suspension or 3 to 10, however they do it. We then filed a petition. The DA's office gets the petition. They will now send the petition or approve the petition. It goes to the juvenile probation and to the juvenile authorities, and then he'll explain to you what the process is after that.
Yeah, Chris, I'll start if you want to chime in. After those charges are approved by the DA's office, we then receive them. We schedule an intake with that youth, and we see, what type of level of care or probation that youth may need. And then after that, they still are held accountable to a certain degree, right? So we try to give them services that need, after our intake officers meet with the youth, look at the school records, talk with the family. We get a family history. We look at everything there and we see what type of probation that they can receive. Either we can handle it in-house at the probation office, or then they're petitioned to court. They're given services. They might need mental health services, drug and alcohol services. We have a great community-based provider now that the youth are being seen daily. If they hit, they're looked at by their risk level. Their risk level means, if their level of being rearrested. So we look at that, and then basically we go from there. And anytime that youth could be on from 3 months to a year or more. And Chris, you could add to that. But we have, we do community service. We do those things. It's that higher level youth is where we're having the issues of not being able to detain or place in a residential treatment facility because of the bed weights, or they're cherry picking and don't want our youth. So go ahead, Chris.
Yes, just to kind of further what Kevin was saying in reference, and I'm kind of losing my train of thought. I was just thinking of something else. Kind of forgot the question. I apologize.
Just the way we the process of when a kid comes on probation with us.
Yes, and once kids get placed on probation again, if there's a petition to the court and they're in front of our juvenile court judge, there's certain conditions that she'll place upon that juvenile based upon the risk areas. We do what we call a YLS, which is a youth level assessment that provides us an opportunity to ask the juvenile and the parents, several questions, and then we come up with whether they're a low risk, a moderate risk, or a high risk. Again, the juvenile will be ordered to cooperate with court-ordered conditions, as Kevin's previously stated, drug and alcohol, mental health, community service. They might owe restitution to a victim, things in that nature. But as far as what we're doing in probation in regards to the situation that we're in with kids being maintained in the community, again, it's been a struggle. We've had to try to be very creative in our sanctions and what we try to do to impose consequences for these kids. Unfortunately, there's only so many consequences that you can impose on these repeat offenders that Chief Kozik has previously talked about, kids that continuously repeat offend. At some point, disposition has to change and we got to move to the next step. But it's hard because these kids continue to violate. Probation officers violate their probation. We take them to court. They're sent home on house arrest. The kids.
Chris, even if you're asking for placement, which I know you guys still do, you're not getting it because there's a wait of 3, 4, 5, 6 months.
Correct.
You're not
Correct.
getting it.
Correct. And so what's happening is the kid gets placed on a house arrest monitor. They're sent home. Unfortunately, with a lot of these repeat offenders, and word has traveled quickly, these kids just cut the monitor off and they abscond from the terms and conditions of their probation. When that happens, we issue a warrant, which we call NCIC. Upon the kid being picked up on the NCIC warrant, they can then be placed in a detention facility. However, we don't have detention facilities available. So it's a repeat effect that the kid goes back to court, gets placed back on house arrest, gets sent back home, and then it's a repeat effect again where they'll cut it off and they'll take off again. So with those type of kids, when we're dealing with those type of things, that's what we're talking about, the importance of needing an area where we could place these juveniles as opposed to them continuing to victimize people and remain home in the streets.
Thank you all for that. We have one more question. I just came on. He says, I was part of the Kids for Cash and was in the system for 4 years. However, my charges were never expunged. Wondering if I could get that done. ADA Ross, I'm not sure if there's any help that you could provide at this point.
Honestly, my recollection of this was that it was supposed to be an automatic expungement. I didn't think it required any sort of litigation or any sort of actions by any defense attorneys. I thought it was an automatic expungement. But if that wasn't done and it's still being brought up, and if it should have been done, I would probably suggest to contact an attorney.
Okay.
Maybe he wasn't within that time frame.
Yeah, there was a certain time frame for that one. So if he wasn't in that time frame, the expungement wasn't automatic.
Okay. So it all depends on where you fell.
Yes.
I guess at this point too, I mean, we presented this crisis. We don't want to leave people without some sort of hope, right? So what could they do? What could they do to bring some of this to action? Who should they be contacting? Is there anything the people and the viewers, out there that are watching, is there anything that they can do to help solve this problem?
Well, Melissa, first and foremost, I would thank you for bringing this story to the forefront, because this is something that we have been dealing with for years now. And it is a problem and it is a crisis. So by shining a light on it and, engaging in a dialogue, I think that is a great service to the community and to all of us. So first and foremost, thank you for that. We are engaged in a vigorous attempt to get a facility to try and remedy this problem, where for this small percentage of the most violent offenders that need to be detained, we have those facilities, and hopefully we can get those facilities close. I have participated in, I don't know how many conferences with the chief and Detective Gibson and with Chris and Kevin, talking with legislators. It's just an ongoing dialogue, but we're committed to remedying the issue. So, in stories like this, and it highlights them, and it certainly helps.
Well, thank you all for trusting me. I appreciate that, because none of this would happen without any of you all. So thank you very much. And
Melissa,
allow me to share this.
I think you opened up a lot of eyes. And I think you did a phenomenal job on this topic. I really do. You did a great story.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I just want to thank you all for your time as well, not only tonight, but the past several months. None of this would have been possible without you. So thank you all. For those that are watching that want to check out the rest of our series, it is available online on WNEP.com. But thank you all again for your help. I hope we can continue to have this conversation as this dialogue continues to unfold, as well as, some of these solutions hopefully will remedy this situation over the next, and months. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you again.
Thank you, Melissa.